After Ciuc was disfigured, he fell from the altar and was bullied. In the whole capital, I am the only one willing to marry him. In order to treat his face, I fell off a cliff while getting herbs, broke my waist, and will never be able to walk again. The first thing he did after ascending the throne was to depose the queen. A disabled person cannot bear the position of queen. He married Farong, who grew up with him and was the leader in bullying him. She gave me some heading hong and giggled. What's the point of you doing so much for him? In the end, doesn't he still only love me? When I opened my eyes again, I went back to the day when Farong wanted to kick him out of the school. This time, I ignored the whole thing. His eyes turned red, looking for me day and night. Liena, even you don't want to take care of me? I called the maid. Are you worthy of calling her Liena? Come on, drag this ugly bastard out. I died a miserable death. Bleeding from all 7 orifices, he died in pain. Before I died, I tried to grab Ciuc's clothes and asked, "Why do this to me? Why rebel? Why did you kill my whole family? Why are you torturing me to death in pain?" Obviously, the person who has always been by his side is not Farong, but me. Perhaps love is something that cannot be explained or understood. I have done so much for Cia and Ci, but it is not as good as Farong's smile. The day I married Farong, Ciuc asked her, "How can you be happy? Smile at me like you did when we were little." Farong raised her hand and pointed at me. I want her life. Without hesitation, Ciuc gave me to Farong. I was tortured by her for too long, so long that I felt death was a reward for me. Ciuc took a step back, as if he really didn't want the dirty blood on my body to stain his snow-white robe. Without even glancing at me, he raised his hand to block Farong's eyes. When Sheng said, "Don't look, it's dirty," as far as I can remember, he has never been so gentle to me. I heard Farong giggle. She has done so much for you, but you really have never been moved by her? Even for a moment? Ciuc shook his head and replied, "Never. If you don't believe me, I can cut out my heart to prove it to you. From the day you came to my house to propose marriage, my heart has only room for you and no one else." What a great sentence. Never. I looked at their backs as they walked away hugging each other, crying and laughing, thinking back on my ridiculous life. I will never be able to close my eyes until I die. The master said that as long as more than half of the people support him, he would not be allowed to come. What are you still hesitating about? Do you really want to be in the same room with such an ugly person like him? I opened my eyes and saw the young Farong in a pink outfit, standing in the middle of the crowd. In the corner, Ciuc was soaked, with his hair covering half of his face, looking like a madman. Am I reborn? Before I could react, I saw Farong walking towards me and asked, "What does the princess think? Does she not want to study with an ugly guy like him?" In my previous life, she asked me the same question. I felt sorry for Ciuc at the time, and I said to her, "Why is Sister Fu so aggressive? Is it because she is angry and embarrassed because she failed to get any results from sticking to Brother Xiao all day long?" Before Ciuc was disfigured, he was a favored child of heaven, and all the women in the capital wanted to marry him, including Hibiscus. She stuck to Ciuc every day and went to Xia's house to propose marriage several times, but Ciuc refused to see her. However, she never gave up. The girl's love is passionate and bright, and her hatred is equally hot. After Ciuc was disfigured, she became the first person to take the lead in bullying him. And I am the only one who protects him. If I were to live my life over again, I wouldn't want to repeat the story of the farmer and the snake. I deliberately ignored the burning gaze behind me and responded coldly, "Whatever." After saying this, he stood up and left in front of everyone's stunned gaze. Farong called me. The princess really doesn't care? It's normal for her to have this concern. Because I am a straightforward person, I hate people who do things behind people's backs. But all along, I was wrong, mistaking the villain for a gentleman. Thinking of what happened in my previous life, hatred surged in my chest. I sneered. Never mind. What does other people's business have to do with me? Xia Yusi raised his head in surprise, and after meeting my gaze, he lowered it again. Farong is right. Without me helping him treat his face, he would be really ugly. My royal brother heard about what happened in the school and came to see me specially. He knew that I had admired Xia Yusi for a long time and didn't understand why I would give up on him at this time. Lianer, Xia Qing is a kind, upright, and selfless person. You must never learn from those mean people and exclude others. Do you hear me? My silly brother, you are kind and upright. Xia and Ci are villains who live in the gutter. In his previous life, he was confident of his brother's trust in him, so he colluded with the rebels and scrupulously. In the end, my brother didn't even have a complete body left. I comforted my brother. My royal brother, I am not excluding him. I just don't like him anymore. There was a crisp sound of jade breaking on the ground behind me. I turned around and realized that Xia Yusi had been standing there for an unknown amount of time and had heard a lot. He seemed to have something to say to me. I didn't want to listen, so I said goodbye to my brother without looking back. Xia Yusi was not expelled from the school. After all, some people were afraid of his identity and did not dare to sign the paper. However, he was still driven into a corner. In the past, he and I sat side by side in the first row, but now I am the only one left in the first row. I didn't feel sorry, because it was me who suggested sending him away. Is an ugly person worthy of sitting next to me? Farong moved faster than anyone else and threw all his books and pens behind him. The other few who wanted to please me lifted his arms and dragged him to the back. Xia Yusi did not resist at all. The snow-white clothes were stained with dust. Farong asked me tentatively, "Is the princess really so cruel that she doesn't protect him at all?" I laughed. "Why should I protect him? He is not my husband." Farong was startled and shouted deliberately, "Could it be that the princess already has someone in her heart?" The maid who was serving me said angrily, "How dare you? Do you think you have the right to discuss the princess marriage? Someone, come." Slap him 20 times. Drag him away. My royal brother came to me again. "Lianer, I heard that you already have someone in your heart and have a favorite candidate for your prince consort?" "Yes, I have." I randomly turned a page and said, "What do you think of General Shen's son, Shen Yi?" "No." The emperor refused without thinking. "Shen Yi is just a bastard and is not worthy of you." My royal brother. In the previous life, it was this bastard who chopped off his head and threw his body to the wolves. He is the leader of the rebel party. I answered slowly, "No matter. He will be worthy of it soon. Because Shen Yi will win the battle soon." The emperor's brother was delighted and rewarded him with the task of leading troops. This was the first step in his rebellion plan. I'm interested in Shen Yi's news. Somehow, it reached the ears of someone with ulterior motives. From that day on, there were always some small things from outside the palace on my desk. I know it was Xie Yufang. It turns out that he likes to use such cheap things to please me. I threw all these little gadgets away. Someone shouted, "Princess, those are Chunhala's pastries. Even if you queue up for days and nights, you may not be able to buy a box. You just threw it away?" I smiled and said, "Do you want to eat?" His mouth was watering. I handed him the cake and said, "It's a reward for you." Behind me, Xia Yusi tightly grasped the paper and pen. After that day, my desk was clean. But every day after school, Xia Yusi would always follow behind me, neither slow nor hurried. At the corner, I turned around quickly, and he couldn't dodge in time, so he subconsciously covered his face with his sleeves. If I were the me in the past, I would be extremely distressed. But now, I just feel refreshed. "What are you following me for?" Xia Yusi slowly raised his head. This was the first time I saw his face clearly after my rebirth. There was a long scar that spread from the left eye to the right chin, which was very horrifying. No wonder Farong would turn love into hate. "Lianer, why do you give the pastries I gave you to others? Is my sincerity worthless to you? That's such a miserable thing." I sneered and asked him, "Xia Yusi, am I not smart at all in front of you? You have to queue up for days and nights to buy these pastries. May I ask how you, Mr. Xia, come to class every day to queue up? Is it the art of clones?" "Xia Yusi, Must have called his men to line up. He has always been like this, making good use of resources and achieving the greatest value at the lowest cost. After being exposed by me, he stopped pretending and looked at me with red eyes, showing his true feelings. Liana, even you don't want to take care of me? What he said was so pitiful. So pitiful. Like a puppy abandoned by its owner. But I know very well that Xie Yusi has never been a puppy, but a hungry wolf without a heart. I didn't want to get entangled with him anymore, so I lost my temper and called the palace maid. Are you worthy of calling her Liana? Someone, drag this ugly bastard out. Without my protection, Xie Yusi's situation became increasingly dire. When I went to the school, I saw Farong and a few others beating and kicking him. Ugly freak. How dare you come here? You are polluting our eyes. It is not your fault that you are ugly, but it is wrong for you to come out and scare people.
Disgusting.
I will beat you up every time I see you. Beating you will dirty our hands. Xie Yusi did not struggle, but curled up in the corner, looking pitifully in my direction. In my previous life, I was deceived by his eyes. Whenever he was bullied, I always stood up and blocked it for him. Because of him, I punished many rich princes and offended many ministers. In the end, he led his troops to rebel, and I was left alone and helpless. No matter who I asked for help, they all turned a blind eye. Some people mocked me. Wasn't the princess very majestic that day? Why didn't she expect that today, the person she saved was an ungrateful person? I was speechless. Thinking about it now, it seems outrageous. Although Xie Yusi is not a military commander, he has practiced some martial arts, so it is absolutely no problem for him to fight back against their unsystematic fancy moves. Why are you pretending to be a fool? All this is a play arranged for me. I didn't have time to watch Xie Yusi's performance, so I walked away. During class, the teacher randomly checked students' homework. The ones I drew were Xie, Ci, and Farong. Farong stammered and couldn't utter a word. Xie Yusi lowered his head, and a gentle and calm voice slowly flowed out, without any trace of inferiority from being bullied. The master praised him, but Farong was not convinced and said, "Master, you're biased. Why are you biased towards this ugly guy? Judging people by their appearance, get out and stand in the corner as punishment." Farong was furious and passed by Xie Yusi, threatening him.
Just wait for me.
After class, he was surrounded by people again and forced to do homework for them. You are so capable. You have done all our homework. Let's see how capable you are.
Right.
Why don't you write now? Aren't you very good at writing? Someone pried open Xie Yusi's mouth and stuffed a ball of paper into his mouth, which stimulated him to cry physiologically, and he sobbed for mercy. I walked over slowly and stopped at his feet. A glimmer of hope flashed in Xie Yusi's eyes. "And I will shatter his hopes with my own hands."
Just like he once did to me.
I smiled and threw my book on the ground, next to his feet. Xie Yusi raised his head and looked at me in surprise. "Princess, what does this mean? Don't understand?" I laughed. "Since Brother Xie is so outstanding, you might as well help me with my homework, since you have nothing to do anyway. After all, I'm not like you, who can only stay at home and dare not see anyone. I'm very busy, and I also need to go out and have fun." I took the lead, and they all went crazy. Books were thrown at Xie Yusi's face and body, and someone even splashed ink on his face, making his face even more terrifying. But he just stared at me. Even when ink dripped into his eyes, he didn't close them. Under his gaze, I walked further and further away. I felt happy when I stepped on the lotus. I want to see how long he can endure this drama. I didn't lie to Xie Yusi. I really wanted to go out. But I still completed my homework. After all, I didn't really want to bully him. I just wanted him to know not to have any hope in me. I am no longer who I once was, and I never will be. Yes, I know very well that Xie Yusi is back. The last time he came to see me, I exposed him. You're back too, right? His expression was very flustered. He sighed, and when he raised his eyes again, he was the Xie Yusi that I was familiar with. Look down on the world, and don't take anyone seriously. Except for his sister Fu. as expected of a man who had once been an emperor. At a glance, his aura was completely different from that of the poor little guy who had always been bullied. The queen knows all about it. He called me queen, which was really funny. How could I be the queen? Didn't he personally depose me? After he rebelled and became emperor, I was the empress for only one day before he deposed me. Now you still have the nerve to call me queen. I felt sick and looked at his face with disgust and asked, Xia Yusi, what exactly do you want to do after acting in so many dramas? A trace of pain flashed across Xia Yusi's face, and he said, if I say that I have never acted, will the queen believe it? What? I don't understand what he's saying. He suddenly approached me, tried to hold my hand, and said, Liena, I regret it. It was my fault. I didn't understand my own heart. Liena, even God feels sorry for us and is willing to give us another chance. This time, I don't want anything. I just want to win the heart of one person and stay with him till we grow old together. Is that okay? I still remember that in my last life, I kowtowed every 3 steps and found an auspicious day to pray for him a talisman in the rain. I caught a cold and had a high fever for half a month, but Xia Yusi didn't even look at my amulet before being called away by Furong's maid. He said someone wanted to abduct her to be his concubine and begged Xia Yusi to save her. He left me, who was sick, with only one sentence. My destiny is in my own hands. It's so funny that people like this tell me to believe in God. From what I know about him, it must have been after my death that he discovered that Furong was not the Furong he remembered. The white moonlight shattered in the chaotic days. He finally remembered my insignificant mosquito blood. Oh no, now I should be considered his cinnabar mole. I am different from him. I believe in karma. I believe in karma and reincarnation. Xie and Xi's hard days have just begun. Xin Yi is back. He won a battle and his brother the emperor wants to reward him. He did not ask for any reward, but said that fighting for the country was every man's duty. This tactic of retreating to advance pleased the emperor's brother so much that he gave him the tiger talisman and an army. I was attending a poetry reading when I got the news. Furong prepared for this poetry reading for a long time. She is also a talented person, but not as talented as me. However, this time, I'm not in the mood to compete with her. Because my goal is not to win the championship. Just as I remembered, Shunyi was sitting at the table, and his licking dog was sitting next to him, mocking him. The women in our capital city are only good at writing and painting. They are nowhere near as charming as the women in the desert. Someone curiously asked, General Shen, what are the women in the desert like? Shun-Yi smiled faintly and replied, riding horses, shooting arrows, wielding guns and swords, women are just as good as men.
Oh?
Even so, I am still no match for General Shen. Shun-Yi was smiling because of their flattery, but I could clearly see that his smile did not reach his eyes. I'm afraid that in his heart, these people are all idiots. Now, no one cared about Furong's leadership. Furong wanted to say something back, but she was afraid of Xinyi's identity, so she could only bite her lips silently and endure it. In my previous life, I was the one being ridiculed. Instead of swallowing my anger, I fought back. Someone immediately accused me of being disloyal and disrespectful. It was said that the princess was naughty and willful, and was disrespectful to the heroes who won the battle. I left the table angrily, leaving a very bad impression on Xinyi. In this life, I sit quietly aside, waiting for the opportunity. The opportunity soon came, and Furong was not an easy person to deal with. She didn't dare disobey Xinyi, but she looked down on the maid he brought back. She pretended to smile and said, I do not understand these things, and have never seen a woman from the desert. I wonder if the young lady brought back by General Shin has the talent of the desert? Shun-Yi hooked his finger, and the woman came forward. Don't underestimate her identity. She claims to be Xinyi's favorite concubine, but in fact she is his shadow guard. In the previous life, if she had not stood in front, Xinyi would have died under her brother's sword. Miss Fu, my people will not perform for you casually. Let's compare.
Oh?
Xinyi smiled and became interested. Furong suddenly turned towards me and bowed gracefully. I've heard that the princess is good at riding. I wonder if she dares to represent our dying and compete with the girl from the desert? What a good move, killing two birds with one stone. The maid who served me deliberately said, Miss Fu, can you also order the princess around? Farong was very proud and deliberately raised her voice and said, Princess, don't you dare? Hibiscus. What surprised me was that the people who stepped forward to stop it were Xia, Yusi. Don't be rude. Farong is no longer the little girl who followed him around. She turned around and said with some disdain, I'm talking to the princess. What does an ugly guy like you have to do with it? You.
All right.
Thanks to their cooperation, enough groundwork has been laid to attract the attention of Shen Yi and others. At this moment, I stood up, met Shen Yi's probing gaze, and asked with a smile, What if General Shen loses? Shen Yi was very confident, shook his head, and said, Won't. There is always a chance of something happening. Is General Shen so confident? A different emotion flashed in his eyes, and he asked, What do you think, princess? If General Shen's maid loses, General Shen must promise me one thing.
Okay.
He agreed readily. His smile dimmed, and he asked, What if the princess loses? I answered straightforwardly, At the general's disposal. Xia Yusi stopped me and said, Are you crazy? You should know Ruyan's true identity. With your mediocre kung fu, how can you possibly be a match for her? I split his hands and said, What does it have to do with you? Lianer, I know you are angry with me, but Shen Yi and I are different. You can't mess with him casually, right? Really? What's the difference? I stopped, stared at him, and asked, Would he not let his beloved woman beat me? Or would he not let his beloved woman throw me into a dog cage? Or would he not let his beloved woman force me to drink Headinghong? Or, enough. Xia Yusi's eyes were bloodshot, and his voice was full of tears. Stop talking. Lianer, do you blame me so much? Yes, I am so resentful that I wish you would die right now. I mounted my horse and competed with Ruyan. I knew she was best at archery, and sure enough, as soon as I mounted the horse, she suggested a contest of archery, which was exactly what I wanted. In my last life, I was defeated today. I was not convinced, so I found the most skilled secret guard to teach me archery. However, since then, I have never had the opportunity to compete with Ruyan again. During this period, I did nothing but come to the ranch every day to practice archery. It can be said that Ruyan is definitely not my opponent now. Ruyan threw me a bow and arrow, and I caught it steadily. She was startled. A trace of admiration flashed across her face, and she said, I thought the women in your dying were all useless and couldn't even lift a bow and arrow. I smiled and saw her draw the bow and shoot 3 arrows, all hitting the bull's eye. Princess, please give me some advice. I nodded, remembering my teacher's instructions, drew my bow and shot 3 arrows. The whole audience was silent. Then someone shouted, Impossible. This is impossible. What happened? Shen Yi went to see. Then I realized that my 3 arrows had all hit the same hole. He was stunned, then led the applause. The princess won. I am willing to accept the defeat. Princess, what do you want Shen to do? I sat on my horse, high up, looking down at him. I took out a bow and arrow, pointed it at his chin frivolously, raised his chin, and said slowly, Shen Yi, I want you to apologize to the women in dying.
Pa.
It was the sound of Xia Yusi crushing the cup. Farong was startled, pointed at his hand, and said,
Blood.
You're bleeding. Xia Yusi pretended not to hear us, and just stared at us. Someone came out to smooth things over, and said, It has nothing to do with General Shen. We just made it up. We just made it up. Yes, princess, we were wrong. It has nothing to do with General Shen. I didn't look at anyone, just kept staring at Shen Yi. Xia Yusi, who was not far away, was already on guard. As long as Shen Yi dared to do anything to me, he would definitely take action. Shen Yi was startled, then suddenly burst into laughter and asked, What are you apologizing for? You know it in your heart. He suddenly jumped onto his horse, lifted me off, and said, Okay, I apologize. I was rude, and I was wrong. I broke away from him and said, General Shen, I advise you not to look down on women who are good at writing. You may die under the arrows of such women in the future. Shuni nodded and looked at me meaningfully. I met his gaze without hesitation. He smiled and said, I have long heard that the princess has an extraordinary temperament. Seeing her today really makes me look at her with new eyes. I nodded, left him, and left. 2 pairs of eyes followed my figure. My palms were already sweating, and I knew that this time, I won the bet. The events of the poetry gathering soon spread throughout the city. People said that the princess was very courageous and brought honor to the women of the capital. The emperor was overjoyed and asked me what reward I wanted. I knelt down in the hall and said, Royal brother, Lienor only wishes to marry the man she loves. Please grant my wish. Xia Yusi, who was behind me, almost lost his balance and called me softly. Lienor, stop making trouble. I didn't even turn my head. The emperor was in high spirits and asked, Lienor already has someone she likes? I nodded, turned my head halfway, and met Xinyi's casual smile.
Have.
Who is it?
Tell us who it is.
My brother the emperor is asking even though he knows the answer, but I won't tell him. Playing hard to get is my next move. I was right. Ruyan came to me right after the morning court session. There is a lantern festival tonight. My general asks Princess to come and attend. He is waiting for you. I arranged the flowers slowly and asked, why should I go? Ruyan didn't expect me to refuse. She lost her patience and threatened me. Princess, if you don't want to go, Ruyan has 100 ways to get you there. Do you believe it? I smiled, looked up at her, and asked, have you forgotten how it feels to lose to me so quickly? She got anxious and raised her hand to hit me. A gust of wind blew by, and it was Shun Yi who flew over using his lightness skills and blocked her hand. General. A slap hit her in the face, and Ruyan was so scared that she fell to her knees. How dare you? Shin Yi stopped smiling and scolded her angrily. He raised his eyes, smiled at me, and said, Princess, don't you want to enjoy the lanterns with Mr. Shin? In no mood. Is the princess dating someone else?
No.
Then Mr. Shen will come to pick up the princess. After saying this, without waiting for my answer, he dragged Ruyan, who was kneeling on the ground, and flew away like a wisp of smoke.
Princess.
The maid looked at me worriedly, and I patted her head and gave her a comforting smile. Before I left, I saw Xia Yusi and Farong again. They were arguing for some reason. Xia Yusi raised his arm and slapped her. Farong fell to the ground and was stunned. She didn't dare to say a word. The palace maid told me that Farong has been obsessed with Shun Yi recently. She goes to see him every day and says she wants to learn archery from him. I finally understood that Farong in the previous life didn't like Xia and Ci. She just liked the person I liked. But she calculated wrongly. I don't like Xia Yusi and I don't like Shun Yi either. When Shun Yi came to pick me up, he happened to run into Xia Yusi, who were also looking for me. Xia Yusi stopped me and asked, Lienor, do you really want to go with him? Before I could say anything, Shun Yi grabbed my waist and said, Princess, sit tight. He took me to the horse and galloped away. I turned around and saw Xia Yusi standing there in despair. Yes, at least now he should not want to pull Shin Yi into rebellion, or he should be unable to pull him. Shin Yi didn't like visiting lantern festivals, nor was he interested in guessing riddles. We went to a restaurant to drink together, and by chance we saw someone throwing a hydrangea, which landed on him. He was stunned for a moment, then smiled charmingly and looked back at me. I said with a cold face, What are you looking at? It's not me who received the call. Are you feeling bitter? I ignored him. Shin Yi did not go upstairs, but threw the hydrangea back and said, I already have a family, so I'm sorry I can't obey your order. He put his arm around my waist and said, Madam, don't you agree? I sneered and asked him, Do you want to be a prince consort? Do you want me to be the princess? What do you think? He leaned close to my ear and said slowly, This morning I went to see His Majesty and asked to marry the princess. Guess what His Majesty said to me? I frowned and asked, What's going on? He told me that the princess's sweetheart was none other than me. Princess, when did you start to fall in love with me? When did it start? Probably from the moment he wanted to rebel. I have known for a long time that Shin-Yi wanted to rebel. It was not that he disliked my royal brother, but he disliked the entire dying. He hated the social ethics and moral codes. As a concubine's son, he had never had a good day since he was a child. In the previous life, he was the one who approached Xia Yusi first. Xia Yusi was moved because he wanted to prove himself to Furong. The two of them joined forces from inside and outside and led troops to force the palace. In this life, I cut off their connection first, but without Xia and Ci, who else would Shin-Yi look for? Xia Yusi has been kneeling in front of my brother the Emperor, begging him to revoke his decision. My brother the Emperor has issued an edict that Shin-Yi will be my consort, and the day I marry will be the 7th day of next month. The 7th day of next month is an auspicious day, which is also the day when I became completely unable to walk in my previous life. I found Xia Yusi. I don't believe that I alone can make him completely lose contact with Shin-Yi. I needed higher stakes, like to make him disappear. Lianer, you finally agreed to see me. I nodded and said, "Thank you," and resign. I have something to say. What? You want to marry me, don't you? There was a flash of surprise, gratitude, and disbelief in Xia Yusi's eyes. Lianer, are you finally willing to give me another chance? It's not me who gives you the chance, it's you who gives yourself the chance. Xia Yusi didn't understand. I pointed at his face and asked, imitating the tone of his previous life, "Do you think that a disabled person is worthy of being a royal consort?" After a long while, he nodded and said, "Lianer, I understand. Please wait for me to come back." I just felt happy looking at his back. In my previous life, I just broke my waist, but in this life, I have arranged secret guards in advance, and Xia Yusi will definitely not come back alive. After I dealt with one, there was still the second one. I looked at the red wedding dress and thought about the possibility of killing him with my own hands. Before the wedding, Furong gave me a surprise. She climbed onto Shin-Yi's bed. She was just one step away from being killed by him. It was Xia Yusi who saved her. A friend in need is a friend indeed. Furong threw herself into Xia Yusi's arms and kept crying. Xia Yusi coaxed her gently and said, "Don't cry, don't be afraid. Fuer, I'm here." Furong looked up, her eyes full of tears. "Xia Yusi, I was so mean to you. Why did you still help me?" "Because I like you. From the moment you came to my house to propose marriage, you are the only one in my heart." Not long after, Furong left with Xia Yusi. She said she had found some herbs to treat Xia and Ci's faces, and that they would get married when she came back. Xia Yusi, he is worthy of being called such a great man. He uses the least resources to achieve the greatest value. Before leaving, he came to me. "Lianer, when I come back, you will be my queen." I know that he and Shin-Yi are still in collusion with each other. Otherwise, how could he appear in Shin-Yi's tent? But this time, who found who first? As soon as Xia Yusi left, Shin-Yi came to find me. "Princess, someone asked me to rebel with him." I didn't expect that he would suddenly reveal his cards to me. I almost lost my grip on the cup and got my hand scalded by the hot tea. He looked flustered, picked up my hand, kissed the watermarks on my fingers dry, looked up and smiled at me. The princess didn't seem surprised. Attempting treason is a capital crime.
Yes.
He rubbed my neck, his warm breath sprayed out, and said, "Otherwise, princess, arrest me?" I sighed and said, "How can you not do this?" He squeezed my chin and said, "I want the princess' true heart." Shin-Yi put me under house arrest and asked Ruyan to watch over me every day. I told Ruyan, "Believe it or not, I can kill you." Ruyan snorted coldly and said, "You're dreaming." It was actually very simple. I poured hot water on my body. My body immediately turned red and blisters appeared. I broke out in cold sweats because of the pain. It looked very scary. Ruyan was stunned. "Are you crazy?" "I'm not crazy." Shin-Yi rushed over upon hearing the news, slapped Ruyan on the face, and said, "How dare you? How dare you? My lord, it's not me. It's her. It's her." Shin-Yi couldn't hear any words. I think he must have remembered the day his mother died. His mother was a favorite concubine, but she was scalded to death by the main wife with hot water and tortured to death. When he was about to strangle Rian to death, I rushed over and called his name. He instantly woke up, turned his head, and hugged me like a child. Mother, mother, mother. I'm grown up now. I can protect you, mother. Please don't leave, mother. I coaxed him and said I would not leave. At the same time, I looked at Rian's pale face. My eyes said, "Do you believe it now?" Matters like love are most susceptible to suspicion, especially when it is a one-man show. In the next half-month, I used all kinds of tricks to gradually make Rian believe that I really had the ability to make Shani kill her. Her eyes, which used to be bright and lively, gradually became gray and dull and lost their spirit, just like me at that time. I squatted down and asked her, "Rian, do you want to live for yourself?" On the day of my wedding, Xie Yusi came back. Farong, who had broken her back and could no longer walk, came back with him. Farong looked as pale as death, and my brother the emperor immediately granted them marriage. However, he smiled coldly and showed the tiger talisman, intending to force the emperor to abdicate. "Thank you, my dear." "What do you mean?" Xie Yusi looked at my royal brother as if he were an ant. "It's nothing. I just want my queen to sit in the position that belongs to her." The army rushed in, and the Jinui couldn't resist. Shani looked at me with burning eyes and said with a smile, "Princess, if you beg me, I will leave his body intact." "You are dreaming. How could a heartless man like them be sincere to others? A man who fell in love with someone who humiliated him. A man who had never received love since childhood. They were not normal people at all. Only a fool would think of curing them. Normal people would just run. The farther the better." My royal brother protected me behind him, drew his sword, and stabbed Shani. He was not on guard, as if he was sure that Rian would block the sword for him. However, Rian was like a piece of wood, motionless, and Shin-Yi cried out inwardly that something was wrong. He pulled Rian over and forced her to take the sword. Like smoke. I screamed with my heart broken. Rian spit out blood and turned around, taking advantage of Shen-Yi's unpreparedness and stabbed him in the heart with a knife. "You?" Shen-Yi looked incredulous. "Go to hell." The moment extreme love turns into hatred, no one can eliminate it. Shani fell to the ground, and Rian also fell down. She looked in my direction and said, "Princess, I did it." "Yes, live for yourself, she did it." Xie Yusi smiled coldly and said, "That's perfect. It saves me the trouble and I don't have to do it myself." He walked slowly towards me, held out his hand, and said, "Queen, come here." I looked at Xie Yusi's face, and he finally stopped pretending to be innocent. With tears in my eyes, I said, "Xie Yusi, at this point, do you still really think you will succeed this time, Queen?" He was still confused when Farong, who was sitting in a wheelchair, suddenly stood up and stabbed him in the back of the chest. You're not? How could Xie and Xie know? It was me who arranged secret guards in advance to save Farong. Faced with life and death, she got rid of her love-mindedness in a second. But unfortunately, Xie Yusi was no ordinary man, and he fought back as quickly as possible. Farong was one step faster than him and fell to the ground, no longer breathing. I walked forward coldly, looked at Xie Yusi, who was kneeling on one knee on the ground, and asked, "Xie Yusi, do you feel the pain of being killed by the person you once loved? This is my last gift to him. Those who play with feelings will eventually be played with by feelings. No one can escape." Xie Yusi slowly raised his hand, stretched it towards me, and said, "Queen, if you are still blaming me, I can let you throw a tantrum." What a conceited man. Even at this point, he still thinks I will love him. I drew my knife and rushed forward as fast as I could, slashing his throat, and blood gushed out. I practiced this move with the secret guards for hundreds of days and did not dare to delay for a moment, just to be able to kill him with my own hands. Xie Yusi, do you think that having the tiger talisman can make them loyal to you? What you said. He was speechless. What I mean is that his soldiers had long been replaced by secret guards by me. From the moment I came back, their soldiers became my men. The reward Shen Yi accepted meant that he was my man from the beginning. Do you remember the shadow guard who taught me archery in my previous life? After my rebirth, the first thing I did was to find him. The second thing was to go find the emperor's brother, who was skeptical about their plan to rebellion. But the emperor was suspicious by nature. He agreed to my proposal almost immediately because in his heart, a woman could not be emperor, and I did all this for him. Everything that happened after that was just acting. But I will never tell Xie and Ci these words, leaving them in reluctance and confusion. Go to hell. He was losing blood rapidly, and at the last moment, he kept reaching out his hand, trying to touch my clothes. How miserable, just like my previous life. I turned my head away indifferently until I heard a loud thud, his arm falling to the ground unwillingly. I walked up to Shen Yi. He was much easier to kill than Xie Yusi. Ruyan is the daughter of the king of the desert. After she fell in love with Shen Yi, she was willing to come to dying with him, thinking that they would be together for the rest of their lives. I didn't expect that I would live my whole life to be a concubine who is not presentable. She was good at killing people, and at this moment, Shen Yi was barely alive. He fell to the ground, still smiling casually, and said, "Princess, have you ever?" "Never, never. It's really funny. How can a selfish person like him who won't be sincere to anyone ask others to be sincere to him?" Shen Yi approached me from the beginning just to use me, and I was just returning the favor, so how could he be so offended? I looked at him as if he were an ant. "General Shen, I have said it before, don't look down on women who are good at writing." I took the bow and arrow that Farong handed me, pulled the bow, and aimed at his figure. Maybe one day, he will die in their hands. He drew his bow and gave Shen Yi the final blow. Finally, I turned my head and looked at my brother. He smiled at me, stretched out his hand, and said, "Lianer, everything is over. Come back soon and be with me." Yeah, it's all over. If he hadn't pulled me out and blocked the knife for him in the previous life, everything would have been over. He pulled me out just like Shen Yi pulled Rayan out today. However, Shen Yi's knife was faster than his. He was right in front of me, and his head fell to the ground. When I think of that scene, my heart goes cold. I look at him and smile. Will my brother really keep me? His expression changed, and he said, "Lianer, what do you mean? I have said that the emperor is suspicious by nature. Will he really let a reborn person survive?" I pointed to the army lurking above the palace. Are they really my people?
Leonard?
Just by looking at his expression, I knew it was not the case. My brother would not be manipulated by anyone. He was wary of everyone, including me. I was afraid that my people had been replaced by him a long time ago. I was just a chess piece in this game that he had calculated. My brother smiled gently and said to me, "Lianer, your meritorious service in protecting the emperor will surely go down in history." What he meant was that I died protecting the emperor. Fortunately, I have a new life. I will never trust anyone again. I blew a whistle, and Qingfeng drew his bow and arrow, shooting an arrow through his heart. This is a bow and arrow tempered with a deadly poison, specially prepared for my dear royal brother. I picked up the jade seal and asked, "Who dares to move again?" No one dared to move. Everyone knelt down. I looked into my brother's resentful eyes and said slowly, "My royal brother, you have been instrumental in protecting the emperor. History will remember you." 3 days later, I became emperor, the first female emperor in history. Some people were dissatisfied, but the secret guards quickly silenced them. After all, everything is trivial in the face of life and death. The first thing I did after becoming emperor was to send Ruyan away. Yes, she is not dead. I had already prepared an iron vest for her that could protect her from all sharp weapons. Vomiting blood was just a mouthful of blood he held in his mouth in advance, acting for his brother the emperor to see. After Ruyan returned, the Desert Kingdom immediately established diplomatic relations with us, promised that there would never be war again, and the two countries would remain friendly. The first thing I did after taking office was enough to shut everyone up. Seeing that this was not enough, they started talking about the trouble of reproducing offspring. It took me 2 lifetimes to understand one thing. Men are unreliable. I would rather be a king who dies alone than a daughter who can only rely on men. Let me spend my whole life practicing it until I die. End of full text.